Hello, I'm Dr. Brad Revering and welcome to another video, and this is going to be actually a multi-video series on root canals and specifically how I have come to my own way of doing root canals over the years. Root canals are just kind of an interesting topic for dentists because everyone kind of has their own way of doing it, and so what I'm going to be laying out during this next video series is kind of my own recipe, things that I've learned, of course, at CE courses, training from my dental school training from years ago, and just things I've observed along the way. So take this information and do with it what you will, but I'm sure there's going to be dentists out there who have different opinions on how to approach doing root canals, but take this for what it's worth and I hope it will improve your practice. I was at a seminar, when was it last year? So it was 2014 it was, and a nationally recognized speaker, I'm sure if you knew this, or if I said this person's name, you would know who they are. They're out of Utah. His conclusion, and after doing research, has found that there is, as of today, no specific way of treating a root canal, that there are several acceptable ways of doing root canals. So I'm sure people watching this video have got their own technique of how to make that work. And again, just to reiterate, I'm just going to be showing you the steps that I use in doing ours. And I think I have a pretty decent success rate. Over the years being in one location, I'm able to see things roll through the practice after I do the treatment. How did it pan out? Is it still there good during a checkup 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years later? And it's a thing that only when you had many years in practice you get that opportunity to see if the work that you did is truly panning out. And I think we have a pretty decent success rate. So also want to mention that earlier in my dental career, root canals, now this is back in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, root canals back then didn't have at least the technology available today to get them done. For example, rotary NiTi files was something brand new that was just coming out back then, and it was something new to me. And back then we had to do everything by hand, and we had not digital film, but we had regular process film, and that took a while to get that going, or at least to process a case that way. So things have advanced with digital x-rays and with NiTi rotaries and just different technology and advancements that have made root canals much easier. So now when I look at the schedule and I see that there's a root canal coming up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm not worried during the rest of the morning about that case coming in. It's just like any other procedure, like a filling or a root canal. It's just a little bit different procedure. So I hope that as time goes on, that if you have that anxiety about doing root canals, that as you do more of them and you use some of the technology available, that it won't be as much of an anxiety triggering process for you. Okay, so let's get into then what I do with these root canals. This isn't going to get into so much the diagnosis or treatment planning of a root canal. It's going to be, we've already decided the tooth needs a root canal, now it's time to start it. So we're going to go from that point forward. I have to say, one of the things that I'm always amazed with some endodontists when they can go through a root canal, go through a crown to do a root canal, they make just the tiniest little opening, and they do a very good job, and I have to applaud them on keeping the access opening small. But what I have found for myself is I like to have an access opening a little bit bigger so that I can actually see what I'm instrumenting. It also makes it easier, I think, to locate canals and to actually instrument or to get the files into the canal in order to get them instrumented. I'm going to draw a picture. If I can find another one to put on this presentation, I will, but you can imagine you had a molar, the gum line here, and if you had these canals that you're trying to get to here and here that go down, and you have this little tiny opening right here, trying to get down to these canals, your point of entry is right there. And that's kind of tiny when you're trying to hit this canal through there and this canal through there. And it can be done, and if you want to spend a lot of time doing that, go for it. But I would much rather have a slightly bigger opening so that I can actually get in and have more latitude, because as you know, there are some canals that have a curve, and as they curve up you need to have a better straight line shot at it and not try to hit it from such a vertical approach. You want to be able to come in at an angle. So first thing I have to say is when I'm doing a root canal, I go ahead and open the occlusal in order to get access for the files inside the canal system. Second thing I do, since I'm working on posterior teeth, every root canal tooth on a posterior tooth needs some kind of occlusal covering when it's all said and done, the entire occlusal table, and that usually takes the form of a crown. And that's usually going to be in the form of a crown. Now, if I'm going to be doing a crown, I know that part of my crown prep is going to be involving taking down the occlusal component to this. So what I'll do initially is I will just take and slice off the top of that. That's going to go away anyway. So now what you've just effectively done is you've taken this tooth from here to here, and now you've made that access opening even wider. Without having to make this wider, because you've dropped it down, you've made that angle, at least the available angle, better to get into those canals. Second thing also about reducing the occlusal table on these teeth is that when you go in with your measuring stoppers, you'll have more of a flat surface to measure against. I'd much rather measure against something like that as opposed to trying to measure against something that's at an angle. Because when you are here, if it stops at 19 millimeters, you know 19 millimeters is there. Or if it stops right here, it's like, is it 18? Is it 19? Depending upon parallax and how you're looking, is it some other number? So having a flat occlusal table is going to, one, give better access, and two, make it easier to measure your depths when you're determining length of these canals. The other thing too is, I'm sure you're familiar with all the different patterns that canals will have on molars when you get inside of them. If it's going to be an occlusal, looking at the occlusal of a lower molar, if when you get in there, again the access, let's say, is something like that. This is the mesial, and let's just say that's the distal. You know the mesial is going to have, probably would make that even bigger, the mesial is going to have the two right there. If the distal seems to bisect this angle right there, there's probably just going to be a 3-canal root canal. However, if you're in there and you find that there's one over here, and it seems to line up with either the buccal or the lingual, then you probably need to go searching to try to find the other one that's going to be right there that kind of makes like almost a perfect square. So knowing the patterns of how orifices lay out on a floor of a root canal access, of the pulp floor, will help you in determining if you've located all the canals. Because you'd hate to go in if it was actually a 4-canal root canal, and of course just instrument 3 canals, that's not going to probably lead to a successful outcome. So knowing the patterns of how these teeth lay out is important. Let's see here if I'm drawing that right, an upper molar, let's say here's the palatal cusp right here, mesial buccal, mesial lingual. I find that usually on the mesials is going to be much further off to the side than what I would normally think it would be. Of course, palatal is going to be right there. Sorry, I said that wrong. Distal lingual, distal buccal, sorry. And of course, if you're looking for the MB2, it's going to be somewhere usually along this line, so somewhere right about there. And I find it about probably, 50% of the time if you go hunting around for them. What can help in trying to find the different orifices, I found, is using a cavitron unit. If you can take a cavitron tip, take the thick tip, and go around inside this area after you've gained access, a lot of times you can jiggle out whatever debris or whatever remaining dental tissue that might be covering up a canal. And of course, using a slow speed round burr will help you find that as well. I should also mention that if you're going into a tooth that has had a previous restoration on it, specifically an amalgam or a composite, I would go in, if it needs a root canal, if you're trying to determine if recurrent decay or whatever the case is has gone into the pulp. If you know that it is going to the pulp, you've just identified that, at that point stop continuing to try to get into the pulp chamber and instead remove any remaining restorative material that might be in there. If you don't, what you run the risk of is if you open up the pulp chamber and start locating the files, if then when you start shaving away some of that amalgam, those little shavings can actually slip down inside of the canals, and that will block you being able to get inside. So make sure that all previous restorative material is completely removed before you go in and start trying to locate canals. And I'd also say not only restorative material, but all decay. You should remove all decay before you actually start initiating the root canal. Because what would happen if you started the root canal, you did it all the way through, and then you went back and removed interproximal decay or wherever it is, and it keeps going and going up the root, and now all of a sudden you're not looking at just a root canal in the crown for this patient, but you're looking at an additional procedure like crown lengthening, which takes an extra amount of time, extra expense, and if the patient knows it would have involved that, they may not have wanted to even save the tooth to begin with. So before you have a root canal started, make sure all the decay is removed. And if you're going to refer a root canal out for whatever reason, again, remove all the decay and remove all the previous restorative material, and be able to put some kind of IRM temp or maybe even a temporary crown on that tooth in order to determine it is savable. Because again, last thing you want to do, send the patient down the road, do a root canal, come back, remove the decay, and then realize that it's restoratively unsavable or unsalvageable. So all decay out, all restorative material out, then you can go find the orifices.